Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. The grooming gang scandal has affected British communities for decades, but has made international headlines this week after the Labour government rejected calls for a national inquiry. GB News reporter Charlie Peter has, for years now, been at the forefront of exposing these vile gangs and the authorities who appear to have swept the scandal under the rug for as long as they possibly could. And Charlie Peters joins us right now in the studio after a week where even Elon Musk has been highlighting his work. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's just go through what has happened this week.
Sure. OK, so on Tuesday, which was New Year's Eve, I saw there's quite a lot of discussion on X, online, about the grooming gang scandal again. Every now and again this happens where online discussion surges again as people discover this appalling atrocity. By any measure, I think possibly the worst scandal in modern British history. And Elon Musk also tweeted about it. He saw a post from a court transcript, something very shocking, from an Oxford case in 2013, which most people just hadn't seen. The details are so horrendous, and it's a real travesty what happened there, that often those bits of information are sort of kept out of the spotlight. But when it did come forward, I realised that I really had to release a story I'd had prepared for some time, which was that Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, had denied a request from Oldham Council for an independent inquiry into the grooming gang scandal in the town. She was asked in July, she was asked again in October. She finally replied almost 4 months later. I acquired a copy of that letter, and when I broke that story on New Year's Day, I thought, like many of the exclusives we've done at GB News on this scandal, it would get some traction, some people would talk about it, the usual politicians who do care would step up, campaigners would speak, but this time was very different. It went like wildfire, and the richest man in the world shared it, and that very quickly led to a lot of attention coming forward very urgently. In particular, Kemi Badenoch, from the leader of the Conservative Party, calling for a national inquiry, Reform doing the same, the government not putting forward anyone from the Home Office for a response at the time, no ministers from the Home Office, just a bit of sort of briefing between ministers, and the conversation spiralled from there. And so much attention is now poured into this travesty, and people are asking, how has it gone on for so long? Well, we've still got people denying requests for reviews. Why was this national, appalling situation never uncovered in the way that it is being done now? And what's going to happen next? And that's the conversation and the question we're hoping to answer.
Well, this is it. I mean, you also put out a thread, which was quite a sort of calm, measured thread explaining how we got to this point. And I think when you're reading the original post that actually sparked all of this and the horrific details, but also reading your thread, and it just felt to me like just missed opportunity after missed opportunity. And I guess the question for us and the focus of this show is, was free speech or the denial of free speech or part of why this never took off when it really should have taken off 20 years ago, or when it was really first uncovered?
Yeah, first reports of this sort of abuse of on-street grooming from gangs appeared really in the 1970s. I've seen newspaper clippings from the Rotherham Advertiser in the early part of the 70s, but it didn't really appear as a political discussion until the early 2000s, when the Labour MP for Keighley, Anne Cryer, raised concerns about, in her words, Asian men targeting white girls. But she was immediately derided as a racist by members of her own party. You can't say that, was essentially what she was told. This atrocity of cover-up was widespread. It went on, and the effect of the silencing on Anne Cryer was so severe that nobody else really popped their head above the parapet until other people in sort of like the right-wing media or the far-right political space, as it was known then, such as the BNP, were talking about it. It became owned only by that group because nobody else wanted to talk about it. That was broken, really, by Andrew Norfolk, the incredible reporter from The Times, who was aware of this, but at the time didn't want to talk about it because he felt that it was a dream story for in his words, the far right. He couldn't imagine that it was actually true. He thought it was so sensationalised. But then he looked through court records in 2010 after hearing a radio report from Manchester while he was driving away for a long weekend and got stuck in. The Times gave him a couple of years to cover this story. In 2012, that newspaper did some extraordinary reports in Rotherham, which led to the 2014 J report. And since then, the world has woken up to that appalling situation, but it's always been localised. We've had great journalism in Telford, more of the same in Rochdale, individual gangs being reported on, but we've never really had an effort to do it as a national assessment, which is what I wanted to do with GB News when I joined here 3 years ago, to look at this as not sort of isolated to some northern mill towns. This is a problem all the way from Cornwall and Bristol up to Glasgow. Now, we collated and assessed reports from up to 50 different towns when we put together our documentary 2 years ago. And we also looked through the statistics on a national level to cut right to the heart of what was causing so much of the censorship, which was concerns about ethnicity data, concerns about who were behind the majority of these gangs and who were most of the victims, predominantly Pakistani men, predominantly white working class girls. That disparity forced people to shut up because whenever it was raised, they were bullied for doing so. They made an example of Anne Cryer, and everybody else who tried after was destroyed, even after the 2014 J report. Now, Sarah Champion in 2014, Labour MP for Rotherham, she was removed from the Labour front bench because she dared to speak out on the ethnicity issue. Jack Straw, 2011, another Labour MP, he said that we had a problem with Asian men treating white girls like meat. Again, he was roundly criticised for doing so. It's taken a long time now for people to actually embrace the reality on this situation. And I'm afraid to say it's taken foreign influence of a man like Elon Musk to actually reforce the conversation in the way it needs to be, and actually to get the survivors heard about what's happened to them and take away all of that political correctness that has stifled discussion for so long.
Well, that's what it is. We have these moments of bravery, individuals acting bravely, and then shut down, and then cowardice sets in, sometimes as having someone from outside to see the craziness, the horror of this situation and to call attention to it. I guess that then allows us to go, well, wait a minute, how hasn't there been a national inquiry into this matter?
Right, and at the moment, the government is defending its position, saying we've already had a national inquiry. They've pointed to the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Wes Streeting was in the broadcast round this morning making that argument. The fact of the matter is, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse never considered a specialist section on-street grooming gangs. There are over 50 different towns, and all we've got is these localised reports. Rotherham is mentioned just once in 400 pages of the ICSA report.
Why do you think that is? I mean, do you think that was a deliberate obfuscation? Because I remember when that report came out and they were like, oh, look, the majority of groomers are actually white, and it felt like it was almost created to push away from the focus on what had happened in these towns.
No one has ever been able to tell me why the ICSA report chose to investigate the towns it did. For background, it chose to look at 6 towns for its section on on-street grooming. None of them were towns where there were previous reports of grooming gangs. They picked St Helens in Merseyside, for example, as one of them, Warwick as well. I mean, Bristol, there was some reports there. Again, they got one example from that. But when we have so many towns, dozens of towns and cities where we've seen credible reports, where we've seen this problem going on, why did they pick those towns? And why was there no specialist effort to research this issue? I don't think it's good enough for politicians to say, we've already had a national inquiry. That inquiry, if I'm frank, no, I'm a reporter, not a commentator, but that inquiry was a sham, OK? It did not get anywhere close to what survivors needed to assess this national crisis. And that's what I've heard over and over again from survivors I've spoken to, many of them from towns where there's been no effort to look into this. Like we said, we've had some local reports, Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, but it took years for them to be launched. Okay, there are so many other places where survivors are saying, this is going on, it's still going on. The National Grooming Gangs Task Force that was launched in 2023 after our documentary called for it, it made over 500 arrests in its first year. This issue has never properly been investigated. There's never been a proper inquiry. There have never been proper efforts to stamp it out. Maybe now, though, that will change.
Well, not just, in terms of stamping out, that's got to be primary focus now to stop it where it's going on still, but also to have real justice for the women who this happened to, and also some accountability for those who actually did take an active step in withholding this. I understand that no policeman, no politician has even lost their job on this matter.
A few people resigned when the information was first revealed in Rotherham, in particular, in 2014. The whole council cabinet was removed after a further report in 2015 exposed the extent of the cover-up. But since then, it's been pretty thin pickings in terms of accountability. 2 years ago, now it's 2025, 2 years ago, 9 Rotherham councillors were deselected as a consequence of GB News reporting exposing that they'd attended a meeting in 2005 which explained what was going on in South Yorkshire at the time. They knew what was going on, they didn't do anything. They were part of that culture of silence and distraction. But still, in 2023, they were still in their posts. They were quietly deselected before the next elections. But apart from that, there have been very few instances of proper accountability. No police officers in Rotherham were ever sacked over this scandal, despite the Independent Office of Police Conduct having their longest running investigation into Rotherham, longer than the Hillsborough inquiry. 0 police officers. There are senior officers I know of, from loads of police forces in the country who failed on this. South Yorkshire Police, West Yorkshire Police, Greater Manchester Police. Many of them have moved into senior positions around the country. Many of them have retired. This is a decades-old scandal. A lot of survivors fear that this is going to be a delayed reaction, even more than it already has been, which is going to mean that many of the people behind this appalling atrocity will never, ever be held accountable for what they did and what they failed to do.
You're going on tour now, so this ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, we've got to make the most of this momentum now, I think. And we also need to bring this conversation back to the survivors, because the last day, I have to say, I've been pretty concerned about how much conversation there's been about reform and Elon Musk and all the rest of it. It's helpful that he's kickstarted this conversation, but we need to bring it back to the experience of survivors and what they want. So this whole week, GB News will be across the country covering the grooming gang scandal. Tomorrow morning I'll be in Oldham, but we won't stop there. We'll be going to many other towns and cities where this appalling situation has taken place. We'll be speaking to survivors and we'll be revealing new details of what's been missed and what is still going on. We'll be speaking to victims, their families and campaigners who are all trying to find a solution and desperately hunting for the action that's needed on this appalling stain in British history.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie Peters.